Hey, everybody, this is Todd Hayen. This is ManTalk. I'm here with William MP, my colleague. We both work in the Toronto area and also remotely with anybody that's not in the Toronto area. I'm a registered psychotherapist, archetypal counselor, archetypal psychologist, whatever you want to call it. And we've got a little clip here today we're going to play and talk a little bit about the sexiness of men. And before we get into that, William, why don't you give us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, welcome to the show. I always hate doing this because I have too many ways to describe myself. The title I go with is existential counselor, practicing in Toronto as well. I'm also a medicine guide, shamanic practitioner, somatic practitioner. I wear many hats.
That's great. Yeah, so you call yourself an existential counselor, and I said I'm an archetypal counselor. Those are like two words that probably nobody in the world even any kind of relationship with.
What's funny though is that people sort of would claim like you don't call yourself an existential counselor because you'll never get any work. No one knows what that means. And yet almost every client that I get, not all of them, but almost all of them reach out because they're excited by the concept. They find my website, and they're like, whoa, this is cool. I've never heard about this. And they're really engaged in it. And so that myth of it's sort of too esoteric or too cerebral or whatever doesn't hold water, not in my experience. Yeah.
Well, you attract the right people. I mean, they're the people that actually understand what you're talking about, and therefore, and they, that's just, I mean, everybody's different. So some people are into that, some are not, and
Well, I'm a firm believer in the law of correspondences, right?
Yeah,
like attracts like.
Yeah, well, that's definitely.
And if you're humming on the archetypal frequency, then people that are humming on that frequency will be naturally pulled to you. And if I'm in the existential and I'm giving those frequency vibes, people tune into that. It's sort of magic how that happens.
Yeah, well, all of it's magic, in my opinion.
It is indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Here's the little clip, and and I'll just say this before we get started. If anybody wants to subscribe to our channel here, please do so. Give us likes and comments. It just gives us a better place to give you more about what you're wanting there. So here we go with the clip.
What kind of men do women find sexy? A man that speaks the truth, even when it doesn't make him look good. A man who takes accountability and is willing to be vulnerable. A man that leads strong, labors hard, loves deeply, and willingly sacrifices for his family and the people closest to him. Now that's sexy.
Yeah. All right. So this is what women find sexy, is it?
According to her.
When I saw the clip, my first reaction is like, right, but then this pops up on your feed as you're scrolling through, and you're a woman who finds everything toxic in a man sexy, and you listen to this and you're like, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm hopelessly attracted to emotionally distant men, or men who don't show up for me or whatever. So that's sort of my initial reaction, is that when we sort of start down this path with these declarative proclamations, we can kind of get ourselves into a bit of trouble. As I've said many times before, the kind of waters that I'm used to being in are always a little bit muddy. And so the way that I like to approach things is to be confident in the way that we present ideas, but also hold it with a loose palm, because the reality is that what she said is probably inaccurate for a huge swath of the population. Would it be better if women could tune in to that? Like, if they were tuning into their feminine, that could guide them to be attracted to that kind of men? That would be great. I don't know that it's true though, in the way that she declares it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But there's an assumption, I think, that she makes, and just about anybody that makes these kinds of clips, is that everybody's healthy, psychologically healthy. And, you could still argue her point, because it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're not attracted to a man that's sexy in the way she describes it means you're psychologically unhealthy. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It means you're more of an outlier on the bell curve, psychological health, or whatever criteria you want to put for it. These are the things I think that she states, and she does a lot of this kind of work, that you could say, if you've got your stuff together, as a woman, this is what you should find sexy about a man. But
Yeah.
it's definitely not necessarily true. You know,
I give her a pass. It's a short, right? So she's
yeah, right,
trying to get to your point real quick. So, you know, I give her a little.
Yeah, but we're talking about it, so we can say anything we want.
Yeah, but you know, I'm tempted to almost go into this question of like, you know, and I think a lot of my clients are kind of, they have this question in the back of their head sometimes, and it can be helpful to pull it out, which is like, what percentage of the population is psychologically healthy? What percentage of the population is actually securely attached? And what percentage of the population doesn't unduly suffer from an excess amount of trauma? And my immediate instincts is like, not that many. I mean, maybe that's just who I surround myself with, because, you know, doing this kind of work, obviously the people that I see on a daily basis, and also practitioners, you know, most of us wounded healers. So maybe I'm just not in contact with it. But my intuition tells me that at this point in history, that number is pretty low.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah.
Why is it low? It's part of it's just the way the whole world or the whole environment that human beings live in is not going to be down some center line somewhere. It's going to be varied. It's going to have all kinds of things to adapt to. I think we may be in certain areas, and probably the areas of relationship, we are probably at a low, not an all-time low, but probably at a low, because there's just too much that people have idle time to think about. You know, back in the day, you know, you were lucky if you had a partner, if you were a man, had a partner that cooked well and raised babies well while you were out in the field digging holes to eat. And that was all that was needed or expected. And I think nowadays, obviously, we don't have to worry about things like that for the most part. So we're more focused on these nuances and these things. And I think Danielle is more talking to the man rather than a woman.
Yeah, right. You're right. And that's the kind of impression, you know, it's like, hey, men, look, if you are not showing up in this way in relationship, that's probably why you're not finding that your partners, or you're not finding women that are really pulled to you in a deep, secure way. You know, you might get into kind of entanglements and kind of flings with people where it's like, it's a trauma bond, if I'm using that word correctly. You know, it's essentially like, am I using that word? Is a trauma bond where, like, you know, my wounded self is unconsciously attracted to your wounded self?
I laugh because you said what you said, and because I hear that term all the time, and I don't know what it means. I think what you just said is about right. The trauma bond, you know, it's like you relate to someone that's traumatized because of their trauma. And,
right. The wounded boy in me is, you know, attracted to the wounded girl or wounded boy in you.
Right.
And we're kind of in that exchange, and those tend to be kind of hot and fast, you know, where there's like this spark of immediate kind of white hot passion that burns out into dysfunction, toxicity, and what the fuck did I do, and get out of there, you know.
Yeah. So just thinking this idea about, okay, and you may disagree with this. I don't know, just curious to know or with this. I do think there is a kind of idealistic way the archetypes essentially choose to play out. That there is something that works really well if they play out a particular way. There's always the shadow side. Okay, the shadow of every archetype can get in the way of that idealism, of that perfect way. But what she says here to me is the bunch of masculine archetypes that play out in a relationship, that these are the things that they will get the best response from say a woman, if we're talking about men and women, a woman that is also constellating the feminine archetypes in a clear, healthy way. Okay, whatever. You know, this idea of you know, respect and taking responsibility. I mean, it's something Jordan talks about a lot, and we talk about him a lot. This idea of masculine responsibility
Mhm.
compared to what the feminine responsibility is,
Right.
and whatnot. Now, I didn't write down everything she said, and I'm wondering if your memory is better than mine, so you can talk about specific things that she said. I don't know if you even want to do that.
Probably not, but I mean, I'm more than happy to like see
Yeah,
whatever it is that comes up. Let's
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like one of the ways that I like to approach this, because people have a lot of projections onto this stuff, and probably it's obviously because there are people that have um, claimed to be teaching or doing polarity teachings that actually wind up doing it in a kind of way that I don't feel like is right. I mean, it kind of devolves into this old school, traditional kind of conservative view of the roles of men and women. So in order to sort of bring this as medicine, into a healing space, the way that I propose it is, if your relationship currently or in the past has become dysfunctional, try this on and see if it fits.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, take in what you're hearing and say, okay, let me try to show up a little bit more, to take some more responsibility. Let me see if I can't soften a little bit and be more vulnerable where normally I would be defensive. And if I can do that in earnest, what shifts in the relationship? And, and in a therapeutic relationship, this works well because it's like, here, let me explain how those polarities work. You try that on, see how it functions in the relationship, and bring it back to the next session, and we can unpack what happened, what worked, what didn't work, what got in the way, that kind of thing. And that kind of frees you up of any kind of like imperatives around this. Men don't have to be a certain way. Women don't have to be a certain way,
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing too that's important to remember is that these things, you can dance these things in relationship, right? And I've noticed that in my relationship, it's like there are moments when I'm in my feminine and she's in her masculine, and it works beautifully.
Oh yeah.
She's taking the lead and I'm following, because that's just where we're at. And then something shifts energetically and I pull into my masculine, and then that gives her permission to drop into the feminine, and we kind of do this dance together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, again, very freeing, because there's never any expectation that just because I have a penis, I'm going to take the lead.
Yeah.
I think we get exhausted playing those roles too. Like when you don't have access to the contrasexual within you, those frequencies, you get stuck in one of them, and then it's like it's exhausting. It's sort of repetitive. It's boring, and it's limiting. And because ultimately what this work is about is giving you full access to both masculine and feminine, and the freedom to gracefully move between them. And which means that, like, if you're not in if you don't have the capacity to hold the masculine, say, or you don't have the capacity to hold the feminine, if you have access to these energies, you can consciously, say to yourself, hey, I'm going to step back, and I'm going to be receptive and open, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to take in, and I'm going to try and feel, because that's what I need to do right now. I don't really feel called to taking the lead or parking my emotions to stay focused on a goal, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think speaking for myself as a practitioner, most of the issues I find in working with a couple are pretty extreme. So it's like when you get into the nuance of it, if you talk, which does happen sometimes, you talk to a couple that really has everything pretty, they're pretty happy about their relationship and they're doing really, really well. Right. Then it turns into more of what you're describing, that there's a subtlety, there's a nuance in moving, like flowing from one archetypal power to another, the feminine, the masculine, whatever it might be. And that refines your relationship as being conscious of that. I mean, then it becomes more of an awareness to be conscious of the variability and the diversity of the different archetypal energies. And the culture is always trying to kick us, especially today, the culture is trying to kick us into these very, very specific roles or anti-roles or shadow roles or whatever that we're supposed to, toxic masculinity, radical feminism, all of these things are like radical movements that the culture is pushing us toward, which confuses everything even more.
Yeah, I think so, but I'll push back a little bit on that, because yes, and there's also this really big push to try to, like, unmoor from everything, and that, like, and this is I think a function of the kind of postmodern mindset that Jordan Peterson's very activated by, and especially the sort of for him the Marxist elements. But it's like the postmodern thing is like, when we break away from modernism, it's like, well, we just like let's pull up the anchor and just drift and see where we go. And it correlates a lot with the Nietzsche's concept of God is dead and we've killed him. We've moved away from being told what is, and now we just make it up as we go along, right?
Well, actually, it's funny you'd say that, because actually, what I just said about it being the culture pushing us into specific roles or shadow roles,
right?
I think the culture is more interested in doing what you just said, and actually pulling us away from any kind of patterns, like archetypal patterns, that we feel comfortable at least flowing with. Like the roles of the masculine roles and the masculine archetypes, if you choose to constellate those, or the feminine, whatever it might be, that the culture is actually trying to strip away these patterns that we feel comfortable with, and we become very confused then. That we don't even know really what it is we're supposed to be. That's why there's so much trouble with identity and all of this. We don't even know what it is. We're confused about it because we've been told we can be anything we want, or we can just let go of all of those patterns that we naturally might adhere to some degree.
Yeah, suffering deeply from too much freedom, is one way to think about that.
Exactly.
Yeah, you hear a lot about like redefining masculinity, and on the one hand, I'm like, I'm here for that. Let's talk through different ways of understanding what that means. But from an archetypal perspective, it's different. Archetypal is transpersonal, spiritual, and that's a different thing. That's about you recognizing that there's something bigger than you that you need to humble yourself to. Which is, I don't know what it means to be masculine, or to be a man, or whatever. And I look for something bigger than me, these archetypal energies, to guide me in a way that brings wholeness and balance and maturation in the system. But I think you have to be in a bit of a humble ego state to do that. And in this point in history, I think that's really hard to do. People always talk about narcissism these days. Why? Because we live in a crazy narcissistic culture where there's narcissism popping up all over the place. I don't even just mean like the obvious, like Donald Trump's infantile grandiosity. I mean, like, it's, you ever try this? You like go on YouTube and type in narcissism or something, and then watch what happens to your algorithm. You can watch videos about narcissism for 3 generations, and you'll never get to the bottom of them because people are obsessed with it. And I think that's like we have to be conscious of that and navigate that. On the one hand, we are free to be able to make our own destiny and define ourselves in our own way, but we need to be moored into the reality. And this is, I'm calling in here Kierkegaard, who's talking about the plane of immanence that we have to anchor in so that we can be in the transcendence. And he made a point way before his time about, and maybe I'm wrong, and the Kierkegaard scholars are going to come after me and say he never said that. But the way I remember it is that he basically says this point: look, if you're born with male genitalia, but you feel called to transcend that and to present as a woman or non-binary, go ahead. But his warning is, don't lose the tether, right? Don't be in denial of the fact that you were born in a male body. Right. And interestingly enough, that's one of the things that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. When it comes to this big upsurge now of understanding what it means to be trans and how society meets that, because a lot of people see the far left who take this to ultimate conclusions of like biology isn't a thing, in a way that might break your brain if you start trying to listen to these people, and that's what Kierkegaard is saying. But it's also, I'm adding here like a point of kind of humility to stay grounded in that, right?
Oh, absolutely, it's a sacrifice as well. Or it certainly can be, and it is a discipline to understand that there certainly is at least an objective reality where there are things that just are what they are, like a needle is sharp, to the physical body. There's no way to change that from a material point of view.
Right.
How it feels when you prick yourself with it is something totally different. That's a subjective reality.
Unless you're like hopelessly under the spell of postmodernism, in which you believe that there's no such thing as objective truth.
Well,
proliferation and multiplication of truths, and
yeah.
And I think that's again
where. Well, I just to go back to the trans thing. You had said if you identify if that is truthful, okay, and I think a lot of that's manipulated through social contagion and God knows what else. But if that is truthful, and there certainly are people where it is truthful, it's not so much following what it is that you're identifying with that's the problem. And most people you talk to about this will say, I don't care what people believe they are, but don't tell me I have to recognize that, and don't do it to children, and don't mutilate your body as a result of it, which is kind of what you're saying about letting go of the tether of reality, of biological reality.
I mean, I think to argue Kierkegaard's point, and I hope I'm giving it justice, but he would say, no, look, if you want to have surgery, you have the freedom to do that, but don't then try to be in some kind of denial that you had the surgery and that you transitioned. It's like he's just saying just stay in that grounding. It's interesting because I come at this from a bunch of different angles, but one of them is the shamanic, and in the shamanic world, everything's a little trans, everybody's a little fluid, and some of the most powerful practitioners of shamanic work that I've ever met are trans-identified. And there's something about their presence, about bringing a feminine energy to a masculine body that is instantly transmitted because it's cultivated. So we're talking about people that have had this authentic experience, and I agree with you that there are sort of people that get swept up in the idea, and kind of they want it to be true that they're having this experience because it brings them a certain kind of I don't know, mystique or cachet, or people pay attention to them when it happens. But when you've had an authentic trans experience, or when that's your lived truth, and you've stewarded that in a shamanic way, it gives you this kind of this presence. And I liken it to what the Hindus call I think it's darshan, where it's like you're just being in the presence of the guru. There's this transmission, right? And it's this like, holy shit, this person is fully male-bodied and fully energetically feminine, and still dancing between the polarities when they need to, and capable of navigating all of this kind of freedom that we see and are sort of terrified by in the postmodern. But you know what it takes? Humility, disciplined practice, constant hard work at making sure that you are maintaining yourself and showing up in the world in a way that's conducive to collective healing.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know, since we're talking about this particular clip, although I think it's cool that we go off on these kind of things. Yeah, but at the same time, I would ask you, considering what you just said, regarding the body change, the biological or the physical change to accommodate the psychological identification. Does that mean in that view that psychosis doesn't really exist as a pathology
in the shamanic?
Well, I guess if that's what you were talking about.
Right. And that's to a certain extent where the rubber meets the road between the psychological and the shamanic understanding of the human experience. Is that, like you're exactly right. It's that in a shamanic understanding of the human experience, what we would call through a psychological lens, psychosis, for in the shamanic, it's an openness and an attunement to something beyond the veil that doesn't work in a binary way, right? And yes. If you look historically at people who are called to shamanic work or selected by the communities that they're serving, often you would assume that they would probably, if you throw the DS at them, it's going to stick,
Is there a lot of discipline though, and learning and education, inward work that a person would have to go through before
Yeah.
he would or she would be considered shamanic?
Uh-huh.
Therefore, if they have a psychotic experience, that they know that it's not a pathological response to trauma,
Yeah.
or a complex, as Jung would call it,
Uh-huh.
that it actually is an authentic movement into a
Yes.
place beyond the veil. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
that's missing entirely from what we're experiencing now.
Well, right, because what's missing is ritual elders, a functioning community of ritual elders
Right.
who understand these things, who see young people going through this and recognize it in them, and can take them out and bring them into isolation and containment, so that they can be stewarded through an initiation process, that brings them into a conscious, skillful negotiation of these things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Rather than it being something that tears them apart and devolves the psyche, it's something that is harnessed. In magical space, it's always about containment and intention. So there's this, like, we hold it in, and then we direct it in the way that we want it to be directed. And if you can do that with what we would call a psychotic experience, you have access now to powers that we, as Cartesian-minded humans, would think of as supernatural, or
Yeah. Right. But there's a very easy manipulative opportunity, and going back to the trans thing, or to any of that, that's taking place, say, in the culture, in the high schools, and primarily in urban areas, where what we call social contagion, that it's the in thing to be, and whatever, and then you subject those children to some body altering medical procedure that they can't turn back on, is where I think most people that are just average people that are not shamans, okay, just most people would see there's a problem in that. Okay, it does not mean you have to conflate it with any kind of really deep spiritual experience of identity with the feminine, or whatever it might be. And that's what is happening. It's being conflated with that. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times you hear that the trans thing is conflated with homosexuality. That if somebody is against the idea of taking a 10-year-old out of school and having surgery, or giving puberty blockers to, or whatever, if you disagree with that, it means you're a homophobe.
You're a bigot. Yeah, right.
Yeah, or a bigot, or anything like that. And that's part of the culture's manipulation, in my opinion.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I'm saying that's what you think.
Well, what the
listeners think that, but yeah.
What? Yeah, and I mean, I think what feels so, like, unjust in all of that is that, like, there are people who have an authentic, genuine trans experience, and if everyone gets lumped into those who are kind of swept up into, I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, the social contagion, where it's like, and let me just sort of run by you what I think you mean. It's cool to be queer. It's cool to be trans at this point. Right. And so if you identify that way, suddenly you, like I was saying before, you get a kind of attention, and maybe even a kind of dispensation, or kind of people treat you differently. And so the psyche, the shadow is particularly, eats that shit up, because that is cover for all kinds of disorganized energies to run wild under, Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so, but what's, I think, and also what you're pointing to here is, one of the things that we are fucking up enormously here is that there is no sense of, how can we know? It's always just, well, it's subjective. Well, let it just be subjective. That's when we run into wild. That's when you get, to use pathologizing terms, mentally ill men who have pedophilic tendencies, who are going to go, I identify as a woman, and I'm going to go into, the little girl's bathroom, and I'm going to get off on it. And you can't say anything, because if you do, you're a bigot. And when people say that, to think to sort of even be thinking about that somehow, you're a bigot, and like, what about all the authentically trans people? I'm like, well, yeah, but we're trying to actually be inclusive, in that we need to protect an authentic experience from being, overtaken by this sense that anyone who wants to can identify in that way. Again, I feel we are back in postmodern, undrifted, or unmoored and drifting territory, where, what does Leonard Cohen say? There won't be anything you can measure anymore. It's the song "The Future." I don't know if you're a fan, but yeah, right. I know what it is. Things are going to slide in all directions. There won't be nothing you can measure anymore. That feels like the kind of future that he was predicting here. These binaries of masculine, feminine, these concepts of trans and queer are just bleeding out in a way that's making a lot of people uncomfortable.
I think if they were allowed to move in the direction that they naturally would move in, we would have a completely different situation. I think a lot of this stuff, if not all of it, is purposefully being injected into the culture, into the system. Yeah. That's too big of a topic to get into, but it does answer a lot of questions, because if that is true, then we're not really going down the drain naturally through an evolutionary process. We're not really going down the drain at all, because we're essentially being told by whatever authority, whatever system has the power to tell us anything, right, culture, whatever, being told that these things are as they are not, as they really are not. I mean, just like what you just said, the thing about the person that has an authentic psychology compared to the person that says, hey, I can do this and then get what I want, get off on some kind of sexual whatever with going into little girls' bathrooms. I don't even know if that's necessarily conscious. I'm sure there's some men that go, hey, here's a plane. You might have that with some of these athletes that have decided, hey, I can win a gold medal if I do this. But I think a lot of it is probably unconscious. And I think the culture gets really upset with it because they think, well, how would you ever do that if it wasn't conscious? Right. If you didn't have a plan, I don't know if, certainly the guy that dresses up like the girl or believes that he's a woman that goes into the little girl's bathroom in order to have some kind of experience there. I don't know if they consciously are justifying that or rationalizing it from a conscious perspective. I think it's a lot deeper than that.
Yeah, likely. I want to bring another point though that I hear from the trans community that sometimes this kind of conversation makes them feel nervous, unsafe, because this concept of like, look, don't lump me in with all that. This is the problem, is that the trans experience has been conflated with pedophilia and pathology so much that it's like, hey, and I hear that loud and clear. I mean, if I were in that experience, of being trans, I would not want to hear those things side by side once again. Because it's like, now we're lumping in. And they might rightly say, it's the right in their fear that are sort of amplifying this. You're making a mountain out of a molehill because, what percentage is that actually, right? And to be focused on that instead of focused on, how we can be liberated and integrated and, and affirmed in what we are, right? But again, I think we have to find the balance, because it's also like, right, I think it's a way of protecting that experience that we make the distinction. And you can hear the masculine in what I'm saying, right? The distinction is like,
you're absolutely right. But I think that's part of this agenda as well, to conflate those things, because I think there would be a very, very tiny percentage, and it would be very, very much like an aberration that a person identified as a man identifying as a woman in order to take advantage of the bathrooms, and I think that would almost non-existent. And so I don't really even know, from what I know, which isn't a lot, but from what I know about the trans thing, is it has very little relation to sexual orientation. It's more of an identity to the feminine that is also expressed physically, but not so much. I don't know. And if there's any trans people listening, to write in and correct with this, but I don't know if a man that chooses to, or sees that he identifies as a woman and starts to dress like one or whatever, is doing it in order to be sexually engaged with men. Yeah. I don't think that's the primary purpose behind it.
Right. And from a clinical perspective, I mean, this is pretty obvious. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is that when we insist upon affirming care, and anything that's not affirming care is criminalized, which is, I mean, kind of where we're at. And you can argue whether or not that's actually true, but basically, if a client comes to you that believes they're having a trans experience, it's my understanding that, especially if you're under the CRPO, if you are not affirming that experience, if you're challenging that or questioning that in any way, you open yourself up in a bad way. Now, why is that a problem? Do we honestly believe that anyone who identifies as trans, that's the only criteria, and to challenge it is hurtful? Because if that's true, that makes no sense.
But
and the only way, how would we know the difference between authentic trans experience and what you're calling social contagion? Well, enter clinicians who are trained to sit and hold space without judgment, with an open heart and an open mind, and say, let's talk through this, let's feel through this and see what's there, and determine, if we can, find some solid ground on where that is. But when clinicians are blocked in that way, where is that space open? And I mean, one of the ways that I imagine that it's open is, well, in queer positive space. Then you can have that conversation. If everyone's queer, everyone's trans, it's like, then it's okay. And I also, there's this thing in the back of my mind right now where it's like, even us talking about it, I feel like we're going to get pushback where it's like, well, who the fuck are the two of you to be talking about a trans experience? You're two white, cisgendered, male-bodied, heap on the boxes that we fit in. And I genuinely think that there's a lot of people out there that would probably be commenting below going, you don't have a right to even entertain this question on your podcast.
Do you believe that?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I don't either. But I think if we were counseling trans, and I had a few trans clients, this kind of conversation doesn't come up.
Yeah.
It doesn't with the experiences I've had. I mean, I'm working with a human being that is dealing with stuff, and that's it. There's no judgment. There's no, and I don't think either one of us are. I mean, we're obviously making statements that do show a position. Okay, I won't call it judging, but it's more of saying, well, this is okay and this isn't, or whatever. I mean, we are doing that, but it's like, as we're just two guys talking about it, two therapists talking about
who in my estimation are not consciously bigoted. And if we're unconsciously showing any kind of bigotry or kind of something in our blind spot, we're here saying, please show me. I'm open. I'm here. I'm listening.
Yeah.
And I would also say, and please don't tell me to close my mouth because I don't have a right to talk about it, because that is so incredibly non-inclusive. It's so funny. It's like, well, we want to be inclusive and bring everybody in, except if you're a white cisgendered male, and you could probably add on a couple more things that you could be that would disclude you. But
that's exactly what's going on now.
Let's come back to the masculine, right? Well, because now I feel like the masculine frequency is like alive in me, because it's like, well, what do we need right now is for brave people who have the capacity to carry masculine frequencies to stand up and cut through the bullshit and contain the chaos in order to bring about healing and reconciliation and understanding in a healthy maturation of the culture moving forward. And if we just sit back and go, oh, well, I better stay out of it because I have no right to, we're going to wind up in a situation like we are in politics, where nobody with any integrity will be involved because there's nobody with integrity there.
Mm-hmm.
And on we go into, this like even further slippery slope of the abandonment of the elders, where no one even really wants to play that role anymore, because all you got in the past was kind of disrespected and sloughed off as being, what the fuck do you know, old man?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's also in my view. It's very easy for me to say this about everything. That's the fault of the intention behind all of this. I think one of the primary intentions is to weaken the masculine as it presents itself through these particular archetypal energies that we're talking about. The masculine that actually stands up and contains and says things and whatever. That's a purpose behind all of this, is to erode that. Keep your fucking mouth shut. It's like you don't have anything to say because you're a bigot, you're a toxic masculine, whatever. And that's working. Unfortunately, that is working. I think that's one. Let's not get into this, but I think that's one reason why there's a huge number of people that adore Donald Trump, because he expresses a lot of that, maybe most of it in a toxic way, maybe most of it in the shadow tyrant. Okay, but it's still something that there's a large group of people that are thirsty for and starving to see coming out.
Totally.
And that's one reason
Well,
why.
my estimation of that is that what people are actually seeing in him that they are really thirsty for is someone who's not in ideological possession.
Yeah, exactly.
You can say
Very
whatever
well.
you want about him.
Yeah,
and I won't argue with the, call him a narcissist. I'm not going to argue with you. But he's not ideologically driven. That's why when people sling accusations of homophobia or of misogyny or racism, and look, there's plenty of obvious evidence that he has acted upon racist impulses. He refused to rent houses to Black people in order to drive up the prices. He printed full page ads to attack the Central Park Five. Only later that they were exonerated, and they were but this of course brought all kinds of shit down on the Black community in New York, undeniably. But is he actually driven by a racist ideology? No. I don't think so.
No.
Nope.
No. And just to throw in this, I think the other side is not either, but they want everybody to think they are. They create an ideology that they wish people to believe that they are aligned with, and in fact, they're not either. That you really think the left gives a shit about racial integrity and whatever? No, they use.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I don't know if we should be going there.
No, I just want to unpack a little bit more because I like it. So what you're saying is that it's your intuition, your feeling around this, that Kamala Harris she's not woke. She doesn't give a fuck about fund the police, defund the police.
Yeah.
She just plays that up to a certain audience.
Yeah.
And one of the accusations that railed against her is that 1 minute she's Indian, 1 minute she's Black. She's kind of slippery in that way. Not that Donald Trump's not.
Yeah, but I think he plays to his audience as well, not through an ideology so much, but through an anti-ideology. I mean, it's almost like he plays to that in the same way. And maybe he was playing more to a racist ideology when he was, not renting to people of color in New York or whatever. I don't know what his purpose behind that was. It's probably more money and power than anything else. And he'll take that.
That's my suspicion is that look, like what even constitutes racism? Like if he took that, what we would call a racist position on not allowing Black people to rent in his building, because he wanted to drive up the prices, because he just thought, well, that's going to actually increase the property value. Mm-hmm. Well, then even if that's true, that he's not a racist, he's a capitalist.
That's right.
He thinks he's just sort of going with the flow of what's happening. He's like, if people have the perception of Black people living in the neighborhood that just sort of decreases the value, well, fine, I'll go with that and I'll make more money. But I don't really give a shit. I mean, that doesn't really play with the whole Central Park 5 thing. I mean, he has some other sort of play. I think, well, maybe, that's just a play for public attention. And he says he's bombastic. So of course, it's a giant, full page ad, big dick wave, because he wants to sort of drum up, attention toward him. Because that clearly is one of the things that no one would argue with, that Donald Trump lives on attention.
Yeah, there's also that part of it too, being a human being, which some people don't think he is, but being a human being, one of his primary human faults is that he holds it against people who have been against him. If there's somebody like in this group you're talking about that somehow he believed, maybe purposefully they did, were out to hurt him, it's like, well, I'll show them. I do think that's part of his, and that's how he does his international policy with people. It's like, I'll be your buddy and I'll put my arm around your shoulder, but if you walk one step past this line, then that's a betrayal to me and I will make you pay. And that actually may be a good thing in a president these days, considering the way the world is. Anyway, can we go back just for a minute to start to wrap this up with talking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, we can bookend this with, you know, one of the reasons I think that people are kind of or were and continue to be attracted to Donald Trump is because it's kind of like he's a kind of example of, look, here's my shadow masculine, you know, like infantile self, fully empowered.
Yeah.
And it's like this hope of like, oh, I don't have to integrate my shadow. I don't have to fucking grow up. I don't have to stand in responsibility and presence and vulnerability and showing up. And you know, I can reach the heights of power and still be completely driven by my own shadow. And I think that's intoxicating to people because it's like, oh, thank God I don't have to do all that work. He gives me hope that I can continue to be. Someone once said that, like, you know, he's the kind of he's the prime example of like head up your assness. And people are like, well, I have my head up my ass and you have your head up your ass. So great. Maybe we can all just keep our heads up our asses and keep on going. You know, we never have to look at the ways in which we're showing up. We'll just chalk it all off to you hate me for who I am because you're weak and I'm strong.
Right. Well, look at it. I mean, look at, just because I was just thinking of this. I mean, look at this, what we're talking about, like through the lens of what Danielle was talking about with a sexy male. Of course, there's a lot of women that think Donald Trump is the last thing to be described as sexy. But there are a woman
who finds him sexy. I want to meet the woman who finds Donald Trump sexy.
Well, I think there are a lot that do.
Not attracted to the power, not eroticized.
Well, they are.
Power, but like just him. Stripped back.
Oh, right. No, they're attracted to the things that Danielle was talking about. They're attracted to somebody who can stand up to the one thing that he doesn't do is he doesn't admit he's wrong. Okay. But that's the shadow side of that. He can stand up and he can provide and he can appear, whether he is or not, but he can appear to be that strong figure, that strong father figure, which is where a lot of that comes from. And it doesn't matter if he's tyrannical, as long as he's not doing that to me, he can do it to anybody, all these bad people that are trying to get in his way, you know, as long as he doesn't do it to me. Now, that's the question, is whether he will do it to you or not. And that's the question, too, for a woman that falls for the bad guy, you know, the man that is shadow mostly is, say, abusive. We know a lot of women that love the bad boy. But that's the part of the bad boy that they're attracted to. Yeah. The part that the other parts are not present. You know, the parts of being willing to admit you're wrong, being willing to listen, being willing, those things that Danielle mentioned as being part of the sexy man. You have to have them both. You have to have the, you know, like who is it that first started talking about the idea of the man being able to pull out the sword halfway and let the sun glint on it, without pulling it all the way and chopping your head off with it. That is not really attractive, although it's more attractive than the man that doesn't even have a sword at all. But
isn't it, you know, the best thing of all is to have a sword that you never even need to use.
Yeah. Oh, that's the best. Absolutely.
The thing I was going to point out too is that I think another thing that's incredibly intoxicatingly attractive is the trickster, and I want to say that maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think especially shadow trickster, that shit's intoxicating, man. And you know, people are like, how the fuck is he getting away with this? We marvel at trickster energy. Right. We're like entranced and spellbound by this thing because it's like the trickster, when it shapeshifts and it slides and dodges and you can never pin it down. It's like miraculous to watch. It's like, holy shit, how is this guy pulling it off? Well, he's not. It's his incapacity to hold containment within the psyche that's allowed this energy to move in him, and he's a puppet on the string for shadow tricksterism. But he's reached these heights, so it's like, again, it's that same thing that I maybe fear, that people are just so attracted to the idea that you don't have to integrate your shadow to reach the heights of power and fame and you know, whatever, right?
Well, the problem with that is it usually destroys a person that's constellating that trickster. that
Right.
they get destroyed through the process. Not other people do too, but you're right. People are very attracted to that for that reason, but it doesn't usually work out for the trickster, for the person that's
Yeah, and I mean, I think it would be a sign of a very healthy culture that they can recognize the matured trickster in the magician, and the ultimate expression of that is the shaman. And if you can recognize someone that can harness the trickster energy and direct that toward healing and transformation for collective good, that would be a great direction for us to go.
I'm curious though, like the constellation of the magician and the lover as well. I kind of link those two together in a lot of ways. Where is the controlled trickster within that? The mature trickster. I don't know. I mean, maybe this is a difference in just that I'm not as well versed.
No, it's a great question. I love it.
It doesn't seem to me that the trickster archetype ever is mature. It's never self-contained. It's always when it presents itself. It certainly can be presented within a mature person. Can touch on trickster before trickster gets dangerous. Okay, can touch it and have control over it. But the trickster archetype itself, when it's constellated, it's that would be the opposite of what it is if there's any control in it. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, so I'll give you what I hope to be as close an answer that I think Robert Moore, author of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, with Douglas Gillette, this is what I think he would say, and I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. The trickster is the immature form of the magician, and the ultimate expression of the magician is the shaman. And one of the reasons that you don't see it is because the magician never shows his trick. You never see it. It's a sleight of hand that you don't even see, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the difference though is that you're actually still in the presence of trickster energy. It's just contained and matured in a way that it vanishes into the sleight of hand trick. But its potency is what drives the capacity to manifest the immaterial into the material.
So rather than say that what you think would be amazing would be a controlled trickster or whatever words you used, it's really the controlled magician. It's really the magician that knows how to utilize the power of the trickster, but doesn't become overwhelmed with it.
I think if we were more familiar with what it looks like for someone to mature trickster energy into magician powers and to constellate that. And I think that it's a culture that's pulled by that, a culture who will look at, for example, elder men who have the capacity and be drawn to that. And this is really what you want, which is for young men to look at that and go, I want to be that. And I'm willing to make huge sacrifices to become that man that I see. But because there's not enough of it, and because what becomes pushed into the foreground through culture and media, and particularly in social media, is the far more exciting, titillating, sexy, shadow trickster of Donald Trump, and everyone's mesmerized, and no one's paying attention to all the other men around him who actually have some integrity and have cultivated this. Trickster energy.
That's the thing. That's the thing that me personally is attracted to him by. But there's so many other negative things that it's easy to lose that attraction. But it is the trickster element in Donald Trump. I mean, it was the trickster that had him during the debate say they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. And it backfired.
I have the song in my head though. You say that,
I know. But that any of his faux pas you can really kind of point to the trickster for. And some of them work and some of them don't. He has almost no control over it. I'm not admiring.
And that's how Kamala or whoever was, priming her, if you want to get conspiratorial about her having the earpiece, but whoever was masterminding that debate, let's give it to Kamala, fine. She did it. She fucking got him so good. When she's like, because you're so easy to manipulate, you can be easily manipulated with flattery and be bought off. And he fucking just went blue in the face. That really landed, and then he lost the plot, and then all she had to do was kind of even in the thing she just sort of points to him and goes, look what I did. Interestingly enough, that's her constellating the trickster. And now we see this kind of battle of tricksters on the stage, and everyone watching is just lit up with excitement and intrigue. Yeah.
It's all a game.
With a little tinge of fear too. Nothing makes something entertaining like real fear sprinkled on top of it, because democracy is at stake.
Oh,
it's always at stake. Every time we do this, every 4 years, they always say the same thing. Democracy is at stake. If you don't vote now, we're fucked. We're going to lose all of our rights, whatever side you're on.
Yeah.
If you let the Democrats win, you're never going to have a gun again. If you let the Republicans win, every queer person on earth is going to be, cowering in a corner, terrified of bigots.
Or
which?
Or all have guns and kill us all.
Right.
If everyone can have a gun, then all the queers and trans will have guns, and they'll come and they'll rape all our children. And
that would be a really interesting niche to do, like a YouTube documentary on. Go into like the gunslinging queer trans community. I bet you there's one. I would love to see some YouTube documentarian go in there and shine some light on that interesting corner of the world.
Before we stop, is there anything else we can say about Danielle's sexy man? I think we got kind of far away from that, but along the same line, masculine energy, masculine whatever that is sexy. One of the things you hear all the time about sexy men is that they make women laugh. So there is a humor, a trickster, a magician that is also a very strong part. If you take all of the masculine archetypes and you look at only their positive sides,
mm-hmm.
and instill that in any man that a woman would be interested in.
Hold on, I'm curious about what do you mean by positive side?
What we would consider the side that is not the shadow. Okay.
So, but in my understanding, I think we should clarify that, because I think it gets confusing. Like we said before about archetypal stuff, it's like it's endlessly mind fucking, right? So, there, if you think of it, and again, this is Robert Moore. There's the immature, there's boy consciousness, and there's man consciousness, immature and mature, and then there's 4 sides of the pyramidal structure, right? The quadrant. And then the polarities are the bipolar shadows. So when you have is it the precocious child matures into the magician, and then the shadow of the magician is going to be the denying innocent one, and the detached manipulator. So those are positive and negative polarities in the shadow. Okay, and so with the king, it's coward and tyrant.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So I think you mean by positive, you mean integrated and matured, right?
Yeah, sure. I would say that. I'm just trying to make it simpler to talk about.
But in trying to make it simpler, I probably just made it more complicated. But
no, but it's good. Because that's the truth about it. It's just, we do so much of this stuff, and especially Danielle with her little clip. It's all very, very broad strokes.
Yeah, right.
That was the very first thing we commented on, and
totally.
What I just said is a broad stroke. It's like, I would much rather use that language of the integration and maturity and whatever, however.
Well, it feels like it's just navigating the terrain with a good map. We don't want to confuse the terrain for the map, because they're not the same thing. And the story that Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette are telling about archetypes it's just a story. It's just one map of this territory, but it's not the territory itself.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when it comes to the king, warrior, magician, lover, immature, mature, and bipolar shadow, the way that he maps the psyche is just incredibly functional, right? It really works in order to understand these archetypal energies, become clear about them, and be aware of when you're being pulled in each direction. And ultimately, when it comes to archetypal work, what to call on to pull out. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is that it? We good?
I'm feeling good about that for sure.
Yeah. No, it's good. Anybody have any comments? Please leave them, and we'll get back to you. And we will see you next week, or whenever it is we get the chance to put another one of these together. So, William, thank you very much for all of your insights and your magical presentation
Thank you,
as
Todd.
the and shaman.
Yeah,
And
thank you to the audience. And I want to reiterate, this is now my shtick where I say we are open to push back. If we fucked it up, if we're getting it wrong, let us know. We're here for that. Yeah, I'm always
absolutely.
open to show me my blind spot. Show me where I could have said something better. Show me where I said something that was unintentionally hurtful. I want to hear it. I'm here for it.
Or intentionally hurtful.
Intentionally hurtful. Probably did say that was
I
intentionally.
do that a lot. No.
I try to be soft on Kamala Harris. I try to give her it. Okay, fine. It was you. Don't actually believe that.
Well, the politic thing is always difficult. But I think, we're calling it like we see it without really taking sides in it, just more observing the.
Totally. And Todd, we're going to get canceled anyway.
I know.
It doesn't matter what we say here because I'll probably get canceled because I reposted something that RFK Jr. said. And people will be like, "Oh my God, you're supporting Trump. How could you? I'm done with you now."
Oh, yeah.
So at this point, the gloves are off. We're going to get canceled anyway. We might as well speak our mind.
That's true. So here's our little end title, and we will both see you next time. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.